So welcome everyone to our second talk on the third noble truth, dealing with, the third noble truth is the cessation of suffering. The last session's talk was kind of getting a conceptual understanding of what cessation meant, and I framed it in terms of total awakening to the illusion of a self. And I've been speaking that way a lot lately in these sessions. You could say that even with this topic, I could speak that way, but I think what I'm going to do is maybe introduce it a bit in that way, but then get on to some practices, some things that you can do to gradually gradually dawn, for the light to come on, in terms of how we create suffering in our lives, how we create this stress and unease in our lives. So, I could start by saying, there's no practice you can actually do to realize this, and that's more true. But at the same time, I will give you some practices. And also to say that, there's no process of purification of the eye. It's not purifying the eye, it's actually transcending the whole notion of an I, of a me. So I'll say that to start. In other words, the ego does not become enlightened. I actually had somebody ask me, just came to mind now, at a MBSR small group discussion, the mindfulness-based stress reduction. She said, I'm trying to remember the exact words, is it possible for a completely, it wasn't deranged, she used a different word, that kind of a word though, ego to become enlightened? In other words, she said, this ego, this mind is just doesn't stop. And is it possible for this? She goes, I'm finishing this, this 5-day retreat with you, and I know what's going to happen. I'm going to go home and I'm going to listen to my messages, and I'm going to hope that a whole bunch of people said they really missed me and how much they love me. And she goes, right away, I'm going to be right back into the ego experience. And I said that the ego doesn't become enlightened. The ego, it's just seen for what it is, an illusion. And can you see all that you wanting people to be a particular way is just a thought in the mind, an illusory thought in the mind. And so we explored it a little more than that, but it just came to mind that I think a lot of us think that our egos are going to awaken. The ego sure wants that, right? That's the whole wanting the cake and eating it too kind of thing, right? I want to be awakened, but I also want all this other stuff. Like it's the idea of the ego, seeing the ego as an illusion is really what it's about. And sometimes that's hard for the ego to, well, it's always hard for the ego to stomach, so to speak. I won't say more about that. So having said all that, there's some practices we can engage in to gradually see how we create suffering and see the cessation of suffering. Because the third noble truth is about the truth of the cessation of suffering. And we can relate to this 3 ways in our daily life. The second way would be in our formal practice, our meditation, whether it be sitting meditation, walking meditation, lying down meditation, and so on. And the third way is through reflection and contemplation. So in a way, kind of looking at what's just happened and, learning from that, seeing from what, by reflecting on what just happened. And what's totally important in this is that we're doing this in each moment. So crucial. We're this practice is all about what's being present with each moment. I know you hear the definition of mindfulness as, being, I can't even remember what it is anymore, being present with what's arising moment by moment without judgment and on purpose. But it's that, that present moment that's so crucial, that we're present, we're conscious in the present moment, in this moment. Because it can be seen, cessation can be seen in this moment, right now. So it's not, wishing for better past moments, wanting the past to be different, not, wanting something in the future. That's just more wanting. It's this moment. So that's crucial. And it sounds so simple, but if you can just kind of get that notion that all of this is zeroing in on this moment. I'm going to read a quote from Ajahn Chah, the Thai forest master, teacher of Ajahn Sumedho, and so on. We focus on the here and now Dharma. We loved calling it the here and now Dharma. We focus on the here and now Dharma. This is where we can let go of things and resolve our difficulties. We look at the present and see continuous arising and ceasing. When the mind starts to realize that all things, without exception, are by their very nature uncertain, the problems of grasping and attachment start to decrease and wither away. I keep saying this, but people do not take it to heart. He loved talking about the here and now Dharma. He told many of his students to stop reading books and to just practice the Dharma. He said, enough, just start doing it in the here and now, in this moment. This is it in the moment. Even if you're reading a book, do it consciously. You're not lost in thought, but you're conscious moment by moment. So this is about the end of craving. We realize the unconditioned. We realize the illusion of the self, and this is the end of craving. So often, practitioners, meditators, Dharma practitioners, people practicing mindfulness in general, think of the end of craving, the end of clinging as something off in the future. Right? We think, well, I'm craving and clinging now, but it's, if I do this practice and come to these talks on Thursday nights, sometime in the future, I'll stop grasping and pushing away. That's often how our minds relate to this practice. That it's something in the future. What I'm inviting you to investigate is bringing the practice into the here and now, into this moment. Forget about the future. The future is just an imagination, and the past as well. It's just a memory, which is often so very inaccurate. So not something in the somewhere in the future, or people think of it as some special state. I talked about this last week, that awakening is not an altered state. The ego is the altered state. Awareness is awakening to your true nature is the natural state. So this is not an altered state. This is seeing through the illusion of our altered state and coming to an unaltered or natural state. So this is ego that thinks it's somewhere in the future or that it's an altered state. So to do the practices that I'm talking about, we practice in the moment. We explore moment by moment how craving and clinging, grasping, pushing away, whatever names we want to give it, how it obscures or clouds our minds, clouds are the way things are. And we move to directly see things in each moment, see the natural way, and that to see nature moment by moment. So we notice when there's clinging, we notice when there's non-clinging in each moment, and we observe what happens when we bring awareness to it. That's so important. Vida and I were, going for a walk. Might have been yesterday or the day before, one or the other, and walking our dog. And our old neighbor, we just moved into our current house 2 years ago, and so we walked past our old neighbor, next door neighbor, who we were quite friendly with and everything, and he didn't say hello. And by the time I kind of noticed who it was, he'd already walked by, and I thought, so the mind starts going, right? Starts churning out thoughts, you might say. Oh, I wonder if we did something. I wonder if I did something that pissed him off. Is that why he walked past and didn't say hello? I wonder, and then that was the first. I wonder if our new neighbors that bought the house, I wonder if there's something wrong with the house and they're not happy. And he's told the neighbor. So that immediately the mind starts churning out thoughts. Well, immediately I can see suffering. I can see the beginnings of suffering arising. And then the moment that I brought awareness to it, this is the mind churning out thoughts. that just by bringing awareness to it, it didn't turn into suffering, really. It just kind of dissolved. So we notice, so it's non-clinging. I didn't cling to those thoughts, so they were able to just naturally dissolve. So we notice when there's clinging, and we notice when there's non-clinging, and what happens when we bring awareness to it. So another key is, to be conscious throughout our daily practice, throughout our day, to be conscious enough that we can bring awareness when craving and clinging do arise. And we see this over and over again in our direct experience. This is really where the cessation of suffering, where it arises from. Not from hearing me tell a cute story about walking past our old neighbor or reading in a book what enlightenment is. It's by observing in your direct experience the arising of suffering when there's clinging and the cessation of suffering when there's non-clinging. And so noticing how this identification with what's arising fuels this dukkha, fuels the burning that turns into dukkha, that turns into suffering or stress or unease. So if we pay attention, paying attention in the present moment, all those words are basically what you do. Paying attention in the present moment. We recognize the moments of not craving, and we can sense into the ease and peace. We can taste that freedom. Taste the freedom. So there was a real sense of freedom that arose in me when I noticed, brought awareness to those thoughts as just thoughts arising. So we get a taste of the freedom. And really when I'm guiding meditations and I say, you know, I'm inviting you to sense into the quiet or the space or the stillness or the awareness or the consciousness that's always already and always present and behind all arisings in experience. I'm inviting you to dwell in that taste of freedom. So if in that present moment that moment when you're conscious and aware and you let go of clinging or even see it as it's arising, that's the taste of freedom that I'm inviting you to sense into in your practice. And it's a very real sense. And it'll happen if you're conscious even for 10 minutes going about your day, you'll taste freedom. Have you noticed that? You can taste this, you can sense it in your, even, I know, Sayadaw U Tejaniya says, the practice is about being continuously aware. And then, you see it over and you see this again and again and again. And sure, I mean, that's a very helpful practice because it reinforces, learning. The more you see something, the more you learn something, the more it's reinforced. But you can also just taste it in when those moments are that you are conscious and aware. When you're not on autopilot, but you're actually conscious of what's arising moment by moment. Taste that freedom, awaken to what's present, and then sense into that when you're doing your formal practice. It's a beautiful meditation to just, and really, so when you experience a cessation in the moments in your daily life, maybe even just stop and just feel it viscerally. Feel it in your body, your heart. Get a real sense. Then when the Buddha used the word dwell a lot, I like that word, dwell in it. I really like that, the notion of dwelling in that sense. So in this practice, interestingly enough, all the Buddhist traditions agree on the nature of and what causes suffering and what causes the end of suffering. So they all agree, that it's craving, clinging, that the 12 links of dependent origination point to that as part of the wheel of samsara. They might all have different ways of seeing it, and so in many ways you can look at some of the different traditions and see, well, how do they, what kinds of methods do they offer for seeing this. In many of in the insight meditation world, daily practice is a very much a key part of seeing this. So we bring the meditation off the cushion, off the chair, that sitting practice, into our lives. And I'll talk much more about that next week when I do the third talk on how we integrate this into our lives, how we know that we know it and live it. I've got a quote. It's a quote from Patrul Rinpoche. Patrul is Patrul, and he was a wanderer in Tibet. I guess he was known as the enlightened vagabond. He really had no possessions, and he would just wander from town to town and practice, give some talks. He wrote some, or some of his, I guess you could call it poetry or talks, were passed down and then eventually written down. So he has this one called Advice from Me to Myself. So it's called Advice from Me to Myself. Listen up, old bad karma patrol, you dweller in distraction. For ages now you've been beguiled, entranced, and fooled by appearances. Are you aware of that? Are you? Right this very instant, when you're under the spell of mistaken perception, you've got to watch out. Don't let yourself get carried away by this fake and empty life. Your mind is spinning around, carrying out lots of useless projects. It's a waste. Give it up. Thinking about the 100 plans you want to accomplish with never enough time to finish them just weighs down your mind. You're completely distracted by all these projects which never come to an end, but keep spreading out more and more like ripples in water. Don't be a fool for once. Just sit tight. All this Dharma practice equipment that seems so attractive, forget about it. If you let go of everything, everything, that's the real point. It's pretty direct. I like the way he starts it. Listen up, old bad karma patrol, you dweller in distraction. So that's the message is clear from him in that statement. He was considered an enlightened, awakened Tibetan practitioner. The message is clear: letting go of grasping, or non-clinging is another way to put it. Liberation through non-clinging. So the message is clear. The question becomes, how do we go about practicing it? How can we experience this in our own practice? So first, as a moment-to-moment, at a moment-to-moment level, which is what I've been talking about, and then as a final relinquishment, abandonment. So as you see moment by moment what Patrul Rinpoche was talking about there, you see it moment by moment, you see it again and again, there's a final kind of relinquishment or abandonment of the craving and clinging. So lots of different methods, as I said, in the different traditions, but I'm going to talk about one, and that's Joseph Goldstein from the Insight Meditation Society. Talks about one way to to see this is through seeing the three characteristics. Now, the three characteristics, dukkha or suffering is one of them, the truth of suffering. The other is impermanence, and the other is non-self, dukkha, anicca, and anatta. You might have heard those Pali words. So he speaks about it in this way. In fact, dukkha, one of the three characteristics, we see that by seeing impermanence and not non-self. So when we see the impermanence of all phenomenon, we see the unreliability or unsatisfactoriness of all phenomenon. My last teacher, Matthew Flickstein, his teacher was Bhante Gunaratana, who's written, Mindfulness in Plain English and a few other books. And when we went to see him, I brought a group of us to see Bhante Ji. He really honed in on impermanence is the doorway, really seeing the impermanence. And seeing that the pleasant causes suffering because it's unsatisfying. So the pleasant is temporarily, you could get a temporary sense of happiness, and but when it's clung to, grasped at, it causes suffering because it's impermanent. We're trying to find a permanent happiness in something that's in flux, constantly changing. So they may be pleasant, but they're unreliable because they change. Something I've also noticed is grasping at it also then creates an image in the mind of how much pleasure it's supposed to bring, and then of course it never meets what the mind can create as an expectation. I learned this in India when we did our chocolate cake practice. I had a teacher who loved to do practice with chocolate cake because he found out that most of us love chocolate cake. In fact, all of us liked it. A lot of us loved it. So he would create these big this big promise of chocolate cake, and we would create this image in our mind that we were going to leave the ashram and walk for an hour and have chocolate cake, which isn't something we had there. And we'd all spend days. I was there for several months, so we'd spend days, building up this image. I remember sitting in meditation, and all that would come up in my mind was an image of the icing and the dark color of the chocolate cake, and that how it's going to be 70% cocoa. It's not going to be a sugary kind of, it's just going to be like a real chocolate on the ice. I would build up this image, and this was part of this practice. So, and then you get there, and the first time we went, there was chocolate cake, and we all we all had the same experience. It didn't meet the image that we created in our mind, and there was suffering. We all experienced this kind of subtle suffering. And then, of course, we did the thing again, and we all thought, well, okay, we know not to create the image, but there was still this, we're going to have chocolate cake. And of course, we got there, and there was no chocolate cake. They'd run out of chocolate cake. So again, another lesson, right? Another learning of how this craving creates suffering. Now, of course, enjoying a piece of chocolate cake is, we can enjoy that moment. So that it's not that we don't enjoy the beauty and the sense pleasures, so to speak, in the world. It's the craving and clinging for them that creates the suffering. So they are unreliable in that sense. All phenomena are unreliable. We can enjoy without clinging. It's kind of or non-addiction. I've heard another teacher use the word non-addiction. So we get addicted to so much um, in our lives. Get addicted to thoughts. We get addicted to emotions. We get addicted to um, the body and perceptions. We can perhaps see how grasping at that which by its very nature changes. So we notice when we grasp at that which by its nature will change, we suffer. We perhaps notice that most readily in our attachment to the body. Attachment to a young, healthy, strong body. And it's so obvious. I mean, it's in a way, it's kind of hardwired, this attachment to the body. So we need to see how that creates suffering again and again. You can just see, there's an attachment to the body. We can often see how we're attached to thoughts and perceptions. We're in a sense addicted to thoughts to such a great extent. Just look and see how often you go to just watching the mind think. Because as we know, the mind just produces thoughts. It's not like you're thinking. If you don't believe me, just tell me what your next thought's going to be. So the mind just produces thoughts, but we're addicted to just kind of watching the show. You know, if we lose interest in the mind, we might turn on the TV or the radio. So we have these a lot of these kinds of addictions or these things that we cling to. So it's again just seeing them. So can we see the impersonal nature of all these processes? I've pointed a little bit to the impersonal nature of thought, which is perhaps one of the things I see, thought, body, perceptions are things that I think we identify with the most as self. This is me. This is who I am. Body, thoughts, emotions, perceptions. But can we see the impersonal nature of these that these are just changing processes? That what we call the self is simply a changing process. That nothing lasts long enough to be called a self. Permanently existing, independent entity that we can call a self. I think this for me, is sort of the aha for me was around thoughts, because I really identified as with the thoughts that I had, and just seeing in moments that thoughts were just arising. I wasn't creating them, or they were just arising on their own. And you can actually just watch that see that in your individual experience. So we experience a sense of self, right? We can't deny that because that's the hardest one for people to see out of those three. People say, oh, impermanence, my car rusts. I see that things change. I mean, of course, the Buddha was talking about a much subtler level, like everything changes moment by moment, nanosecond by nanosecond. And we see how, to an extent, we can see how dukkha is, that we experience pain and difficulties in our lives. But seeing non-self is one where people kind of go, oh, I'm not really seeing that one. And that's because we do sense that there's a self here. I have all these emotions, thoughts, this body. So we get a sense that there is a self here. So it's hard to see it as an illusion when it seems so real. Because we feel it. We feel all of this. There's a Tibetan teacher, I can't remember the name, that was asked, the question to him was, is the self real? And his answer was, yes, it's real, but not really real. Yes, it's real, but it's not really real. So it's kind of real in the conventional world that we sense this in our, in our experience, that we sense that we have this kind of sense that there's all this, but we want to understand it at a deeper level. At a deeper level. Seeing it as simply an emergent property, as something that's it's co-arising with everything else. That we are the environment, we are the cosmos. We're not separate from it in any way. We're all constantly interchanging molecules. And we're just a bunch of elements that have come together. Kind of like H2O, hydrogen and oxygen. It's just two elements that came together to create H2O. So when we put what the Buddha called the five aggregates, body, mental formations, perceptions, feeling tone, and small c, consciousness, when we bring those together, we get a sense of self. So we identify with those aspects, those five, what does he call it? It gets translated as aggregates. Probably not the best. The best kind of means heaps or collections of things. The body's like a collection of properties. So each of these five aggregates are in constant flux. They're constantly changing. So we see this again and again. We see the impersonal nature of it, that we're not doing it, and we see that it's constantly in flux and changing. So we can non-identify with it, or the word that Buddha used, I forget, that it gets translated as we become disenchanted with those five categories or five aggregates: body, mental formations, perceptions, the feeling tone of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and this sense of a self that's aware. We become disenchanted. So I like that word, disenchanted, because it's kind of like we're waking up from a spell of enchantment. We're enchanted with this collection, and we're kind of waking up from a spell. So it's kind of like to be lost in the mind in a drama, and at some point we awaken that it's just thoughts. Or when you're having a dream and you awaken from the dream, when I've had the experience where I'm dreaming and I'll be woken up by the events in the dream, because it's usually something that's startling or there's dangerous or whatever, I'll be woken up by that, what's happening in the dream. And for that little nanosecond, there's a shift from, wow, this is terrible, to, oh, it's just a dream. No longer under the spell of of that dream. It's simply let go of. As so you just kind of watch the heart rate come down and body settle, because there's no more identification with what was occurring in the sleeping dream. So we awaken at that point. So as we begin to see this flow of change, we can it can lead to a strong equanimity. And then practice moves forward at that point in a fairly effortless way. It's this kind of equanimity. We see the flow of change, equanimity arises. We talked about that when we talked about the factors of awakening. We notice the arising and passing of pleasant and unpleasant. Just notice the arising and all that you're doing. You see the arising of unpleasant, arising of pleasant, arising of neutral, and all that you're doing in kind of an effortless way. Another word I like that gets translated from the Buddha is in imperturbability. Imperturbability. Through disenchantment, we become imperturbable. How's that for a dharmic statement? So imperturbability. So we're not sort of thrown about by what's arising. We see everything without. We just allow everything to arise and pass without having to interfere in it. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead here. I've got too much to say in this talk. So just to say that we're not grasping at desirelessness or cravinglessness, right? We have to watch that the self doesn't get into this and start to grasp at it. I want to get rid of desire. I want to get rid of this, right? I want to get rid of, and that's just desiring desirelessness so you can get what you want, right? It's just the ego, again, desiring desirelessness. So we have to be very wary of that. We're not grasping at desirelessness. We can identify with this. The ego will, as Joseph Goldstein calls it, as a trickster. You have to watch how the ego will play these games. So for me, what's been so key in my practice, and perhaps because I was so identified with the mind, is remembering the don't know mind or the beginner's mind. Really remembering that. What I really know is that I don't know. I love that statement. What I really know is that I don't know. So even the awakening is a great mystery. So not trying to figure out a cause and effect, but simply living the teachings and living them as a mystery. You know that quote by Ajahn Sumedho that we had, that consciousness is immortal, big C consciousness, or that awareness that I talked about that's already and always present, is immortal. And so I went back and forth with Ajahn V a little bit, and you know, he talked a lot about what consciousness was. How, you know, big C consciousness versus the little c, which we talk about in the five aggregates. We had this big dharmic discussion. So I pushed him a little on the immortal part, right? And the reply I got was, it's a great mystery. Just live the mystery, Stephen. You know, so it's that, you know, you just know that you don't know, right? We're not going to figure this out with the mind. So we let go of because the mind's part of the illusion. I love this. I'll end with this T.S. Eliot quote. In order to arrive at what you do not know, you must go by a way which is the way of ignorance. In order to possess what you do not possess, you must go by the way of dispossession. In order to arrive at what you are not, you must go through the way in which you are not. And what you do not know is the only thing you know. And what you own is what you do not own. And where you are is where you are not. You'd have to read that a few times, right? But as T.S. Eliot has a way with spinning the mind. So you're going to try and figure that out, right? But the words are really, you get a felt sense of we just do not know. And can we practice in that not knowing place? Can we just see in our direct experience how we create suffering in our lives, and how suffering can cease through the abandonment of clinging, through letting go. Just seeing that, not trying to figure it out. We just see it with that very easeful and light touch. So I'll end there. I didn't get to the reflection and the formal practice part. I only got through the first of the three ways, but of course, this could be a whole 7-day retreat. Just the direct practice and seeing the cessation is a very deep topic. So I'll open it up for any questions.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
Thank you, Stephen, for all of these talks recently. They're very thought-provoking and, lots to kind of mull through during the week. I kind of get what you're talking about tonight, and I kind of don't. And it's probably my desire to understand. So, I'm trying to hold that lightly. I think I have kind of felt that freedom that you talked about. Just as a very small example, I live with 4 other people, which I'm very lucky about. And we have supper and then we play cards. And I remember I used to be kind of like, oh, that person didn't put that card out. And then it was like, I'm not going to win kind of stuff. And during the time, because it's, we play almost every night, I've kind of let go of that. And it's a nice game, and I'm not kind of held or craved to kind of win a particular game or not. And it's much more easy, but part of that is like, well, I'm not caring, so it doesn't matter as much. And I kind of keep getting that thought kind of come up in me when, if I'm not invested in something, then and therefore don't care, then I'm okay with the outcome. And I know there's part of that to be true, but I kind of don't want to be that way. I want to care about stuff, and I want to see change, and I want to, so I keep coming back and forth with that. And I totally get the impermanence, but I only get the impermanence when things change quickly. Like you can watch the weather and you can watch the clouds kind of come and they go. But some of the clouds, they leave snow, and then you've got to shovel the snow. So there's always something that it seems less impermanent, maybe the snow becomes ice and then you slip on the ice. And I know this is all semantics and limitations of language and all of the rest of it, but it's, I kind of like to play with these analogies. So anyway, I'm kind of trying to let the stream and river go by, and, some of this may stick and some of it may not, but so I don't know, maybe more of a comment of where I am as opposed to an actual question, but any thoughts on that would be great. Thank you.
What you said at the end there, I forget how you worded it, but just letting it wash over you or something along those lines. Yeah, I mean, that's how these talks can be received. From that don't know mind or beginner's mind. The whole the notion of not caring, I get that question a lot, because when it comes from people, a lot of the people that are active in the world in particular, who want to work for social justice and this kind of thing. And so I get that question a lot, and just from people that care about others, so this practice is so when we talk about non-attachment, non-identification, we're really talking about letting go of attachment to a particular, to having to have a particular outcome, right? We can be engaged fully in what we're doing. We don't know what's going to happen. We realize that that's the truth of the moment, that we do the best we can, but we don't know what's going to happen, and that things change. So whatever happens is the total flux, moment by moment. I think an example that I went to this movie that was playing at the Mayflower, and it was of the a group of Tibetan monks building a big mandala out of popsicle sticks. And they do this quite often from sand too. They'll spend hours building a structure, a mandala out of sand. In this case, it was popsicle sticks. And the whole movie, I brought Vida. It was a meditation. I should have warned her, because it was an hour and a half of watching these monks put together, and it was like sped up, because I think they did it for a week or so, putting together this popsicle stick structure for an hour and a half, and then at the end they destroyed it, and the movie was over. But and she couldn't believe that she just sat through this, because the mind was wanting to be entertained, not to be to be meditative. It's a different state of different state. So but what they were displaying was the non-attachment to what, so they put care and dedication into what they were doing, but there was no attachment to it, to the outcome. It's impermanent anyway. So that's image, and Vida's reaction to it stuck in my mind. There is a really good illustration of non-attachment to outcome, and just but being very present and very dedicated and committed to what we're doing, and to doing it the best we can. So if what arises within our being is to work for social justice, we do that because that's what's the most important to us. At a deep level, we do the best we can, and we do it from that place. But it may not work out the way we want it to. If we're attached to that outcome, we could actually get disillusioned very quickly. And we also have to watch to see if our engagement in social justice is actually coming from that deeper place, and it's not the ego wanting to be seen or to become, right, or to be liked, so forth, just to fill a sense of lack. But yeah, to get back to the, non-attachment to outcome is what the teachings are pointing at, are inviting us to investigate how that causes suffering. Yeah.
I would love to read that T.S. Eliot poem at some point. Can you provide the name so we could look it up and read it? It's amazing.
I think if you just Google T.S. Eliot in order to arrive at what you do not know.
Okay, that's the name of it, eh?
Well, that's the first sentence, and
Okay.
I don't actually have a title here. I think what I often do is I take sections of fairly long compositions. Yeah.
It really makes you think and kind of plays with the mind in the way that you were really talking about, and it really resonated with me. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. I think Eliot and Emerson both wrote from a place of deep awakening and understanding. Their poems come from that, are written from that place.
You said something a little somewhere near the beginning of the talk, and I just had this question pop up. Can you talk about ego versus small c consciousness or the mind? Like, are they the same thing, or like how do they relate if they're not the same thing? Thank you.
Yeah, this is kind of the dharmic gymnastics that Ajahn Verdamo and myself are going through. But the fun thing is when you have these, they're kind of like mental gymnastics. They're kind of fun, right? Like going to the gym or something. But how helpful they'll be to. At the end, we both kind of had the idea that yeah, well, who knows, right? We said we had all this big, deep, and then in the end it's all a mystery, and who really knows, right? All I know is neither one of us really knows, but that was fun to bounce it around. But when I use the word ego, I'm talking about the illusory self, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I say egoic mind or egoic state of consciousness, it's again that illusory self. So that's that's the. So you can also use the mind, and you say pure mind, and the Tibetans will refer to pure mind, which is the pointing to the awakened mind. So this mind is still used, but it's again just a different way of pointing to that. I use awareness, consciousness, still, space, quiet, all those kinds of words pointing to the awakened mind. When I say, this is kind of important, I guess, when I say small, so when the Buddha talked about the 5 aggregates, which is what we take to be permanent and a self, an independent, our independent essence, one of them is consciousness. Mm-hmm. One of the kilesas is consciousness, body, mental formations, which includes emotions, perceptions, feeling tone, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and consciousness. So then when I use the word consciousness, resting in awareness or consciousness, that's why I say big C and little c. So little c consciousness is that, just that sense door that, if a sound arises, you have the sense organ, the sense object, which is the sound. You have to have sense consciousness for it to be an experience.
Hmm.
Right? You can have the sound, and you can have the sense object, and you can have the sense organ, but if there's no sense consciousness, it's not an experience. It didn't happen. It just didn't happen. It's not part of your reality. So that's what small, so we can identify. In fact, that's the, in terms of identification as a self, that's usually the last one that goes. People will, will still identify with that as being, who I am, when they've seen through the others that sense of being conscious of what's coming through the sense doors: sight, sounds, smells, tastes, thoughts, sensations. So that's the little c. The big C is just that the being of, that always and already present, still sense of being. And so that's sometimes called consciousness. And Ajahn Sumedho used the word consciousness when he spoke about it in that talk several weeks ago. So that's why I say big C, consciousness. And mind, you could say little m, mind, and big M, mind. But it's just kind of pointing to two different, really, dimensions of it. One dimension of illusion, and the other dimension of who we really are. But that's really what's key, is regardless of the words, is one is fabricated in our thoughts, so that it doesn't have any real, it's just thoughts, and the other is our true nature. It's always present, and that's what I was inviting you to to touch into or taste when you see the cessation of suffering. What you'll notice is when you're aware of the cessation of suffering, that there's no thought in that space. When you're there's no thought. Of course, thought might jump in pretty quick, but there's still the moments of just, that's why I use the words like space and stillness and quiet. I even like the word quiet. It's not a word many people use, but to me, it's a real sense of quiet. Because I have this personality that's evolved here is pretty noisy. It's a noisy mind, right? So that's, I think, why the word quiet kind of, there's just this kind of quiet stillness, as opposed to noisy mind, quiet mind. Yeah. Hope that clarifies it a little bit. They're all, fingers pointing at the moon, as we say,
Right.
Yeah. But it's important to know the terminology, if so we can, we need that understanding, but so it's important to ask those questions, because we need the understanding to then be able to go and do the practice. So the important part is the practice, seeing it in our direct experience, but we need that base kind of, that's why teachers give these talks. If it was only about practice, we would never give a talk, right? We would just ring a bell, give you some practice to do, we ring the bell, and we'd all say goodbye, right? Right? And for many of us, that might be the best thing to do. That's I'd say for 90% of the Dharma practitioners I run into in the West, they should read a lot less and practice a lot more.